Democrats are going to do for them.
Andy Barr, national political reporter with Politico. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We'll go now to the floor of the House of Representatives. Getting underway, they're discussing the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012.
Having endowed each with unique and important talents. On this day, we ask your blessing on the men and women of the People's House, who have been entrusted with the care of this great nation's people, and because of the great blessings you have bestowed on our nation, the opportunity to build a better world beyond our borders as well. Please teach each member to be generous with the gifts you have given and the opportunities with which they have been presented. May they give and not count the cost. Fight for the greater good and not count the wounds. Toil in their efforts and not seek to rest. Labor and not ask for reward other than to know that they are doing your will. May all that they do this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the previous day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from Kansas.
Please join me in pledging allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 one-minute requests on each side. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Unanimous consent to speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate a local hero from my home district. At just 7 years old, Abby Baranki of Lamont, Illinois, demonstrated quick thinking and courage when a fire broke out in her home, utilizing the fire skills she learned as a Girl Scout to keep her family safe. When she realized her home was on fire, first grader Abby Bernanke remained calm and immediately put in action the lessons she learned when her troop visited the Lamont fire station. Because of Abby's courage and quick thinking, she was able to help her mom and keep her 18-month-old brothers and her 3-month-old sister safe. I also want to commend the Lamont Fire Protection District, especially Jeff Hawthorne and Chief Carl Chirlolo, for offering life-saving educational safety courses for our children. Their hard work and willingness to reach out to the community has clearly made a difference and saved lives. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me in recognizing a local hero, Abby Bernanke of Lamont, Illinois, who has made her community and her family very proud. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California wish to be recognized? Without objection, gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we've all heard the jokes about how many people does it take to screw in a light bulb. Well, I have a variation on that this morning. How many seniors have to lose their Medicare in order to provide $104,000 tax cut per year for every millionaire? The answer is 17. 17 seniors will see a reduction in their Medicare or an additional cost of $6,000 a year in order to pay for the millionaire tax cut of $104,000. Mr. Speaker, even the Wall Street Journal, the conservative Wall Street Journal, has said the House Republicans' plan will likely result in higher out-of-pocket costs and greater limits to coverage for all Americans. House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan's solution is to end the current Medicare program for people. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Kansas wish to be recognized?
Without objection,
Gentlelady from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
I have the honor and privilege of representing Fort Riley, home of the 1st Infantry Division, or the Big Red One, which has been under the command of Major General Vincent Brooks since April of 2009, a term that included a year-long deployment to Iraq. General Brooks is being promoted to a 3-star general and will be moving on from Fort Riley. In his short time in Kansas, he has been a tremendous asset to Fort Riley, a devoted member of our community and a wonderful advisor to me personally, and we are sad to see him go. While I could not be back in the district to attend the change of command ceremony, I wanted to take a moment and thank General Brooks for his dedication and service to our country, congratulate him on his promotion, and let him know that he will be truly missed at Fort Riley, Kansas. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota wish to be recognized?
To address the House for 1 minute to revise the statement.
Without objection, gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Monday, Memorial Day, will give citizens from around the country the opportunity to come together and remember those who have laid down their lives in defense of our freedom. The debt we owe our nation's service member and veterans is immeasurable. Therefore, it's fitting that to honor those heroes by renewing our commitment in this House to caring for those service members, both while they're in the military and after they return home. As a 24-year veteran of our armed services, I'm proud of the work we've done in Congress to support our veterans and service members, passed landmark budgets worthy of our veterans, made sure the VA health care budget was delivered a year in advance, expanded VA health care for returning combat veterans, increased support for veteran caregivers, passed a 21st century GI Bill and continue to improve upon it, and enhancing employment opportunities. Although we've come a long way, our work is never done. We must ensure that our returning troops do not fall through the cracks and that they make the transition to civilian life with the full support of this nation. On behalf of that grateful nation, we thank our current service members, our veterans, and their families for their service. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York wish to be recognized? Without objection, gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, this Monday is Memorial Day, and Memorial Day reminds us that the most fundamental right of Americans, the one we cherish most, is to be free. But that freedom is purchased at a dear price. I rise in gratitude to the millions of Americans who have made the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, and to their family members. And I remember in particular Private David R. Fahey of Yorktown Heights, New York, from our own District 19, who made the ultimate sacrifice this year. Thanks to all of our veterans and all of our families who do so much to assure that we enjoy the freedoms that we cherish every day. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Yields back her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues across the aisle have recently claimed that current seniors won't be impacted by their plan to end Medicare as we know it. This is simply not true. From day one, their plan would force seniors to pay more for prescription drugs and health services because the donut hole will be reopened and free wellness visits under Medicare would be eliminated. As a consequence of reopening the donut hole in my state of New Jersey alone, an estimated 143,000 seniors will pay $80 million more for prescription drugs in 2012. Additionally, the majority's plan to rescind a ban on copays for wellness visits for seniors would force at least 30,000 New Jersey seniors to pay over $3 million more for annual wellness visit next year. Once the plan takes effect in 2022, out-of-pocket expenses for seniors will soar. A typical 65-year-old New Jersey would pay $7,000 more in 2022 for health care costs, more than double the cost under current law. Mr. Speaker, the majority's plan for Medicare does not preserve the program as we know it. Rather, it takes money from seniors' pocket and places them at the mercy of rising insurance costs. Now you're back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, a gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, my district is losing one of its very best agricultural reporters to retirement. Bill Jackson will be leaving the Greeley Tribune, and in his place will be a big hole in coverage of agricultural districts, the agricultural issues in the 4th Congressional District of Colorado. He spent his entire childhood and early years in Fort Morgan, but ultimately moved to my hometown of Yuma, Colorado, where he graduated high school. Spending time in the Navy after that, he went to Arizona and Sterling before the Greeley Tribune in 1977, where he has spent the last many years. In 2004, Bill was inducted into the Colorado Agricultural Hall of Fame. Mike Peters, one of Bill's colleagues at the Greeley Tribune, wrote a speech about Bill for his retirement, and it was so funny that I'd like to share some of those excerpts with you today. You know you're Bill Jackson if you go to cover a water meeting and you know what the heck they're talking about. You know you're Bill Jackson if, when someone mentions Charlie or Dick Monfort, instead of talking Rockies baseball, you tell them how you changed their diapers when they were little. You know you're Bill Jackson if you know every single farmer, rancher, milker, ditch rider, beet picker, cowboy, cowgirl, and rainmaker in Weld County. You know you're Bill Jackson if the term NISP not only makes sense, but it also makes your heart race. You know you're Bill Jackson if you know the path of a snowflake from the point it falls from the sky onto the mountain. It goes into a river and a reservoir and down a river until it reaches your water cup. We're going to miss Bill Jackson. Thank you for your service to Colorado agriculture. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, throughout its illustrious history, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has served as a proving ground for many innovations that have become mainstays in automotive production at raceways around the world. But it's the 500-mile race that is conducted at the end of May that makes the Indianapolis Motor Speedway so special. Every Memorial Day weekend, 300,000 fans from across the world gather at the historic track for the greatest spectacle in racing, the Indianapolis 500. This year, I, along with motorsports fans from around the world, am excited to be celebrating the 100th anniversary of this famous race. For 100 years now, legions of fans have traveled to the town of Speedway, Indiana, to witness the premier motorsports event in the world and to see which driver's likeness will be added to one of the most coveted trophies in the world of sports, the Borg-Warner Trophy. As the largest single sporting event in the world, the Indianapolis 500 remains a great source for my constituents in the 7th Congressional District and for Hoosiers all across the United States. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, 3 weeks ago Tuesday, a police chief in my district stopped a man for speeding. The driver was an illegal alien. He didn't speak English, so a translator was called. The man had been in the United States for 6 years. He had been arrested before. He had no job. He didn't know where he lived. He had $3 cash in his pocket, and he had 2 public benefit access cards. When a police chief called Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE said, "Let him go." At a time when our nation is broke and when programs for our elderly are being cut, ICE must not allow people like this to defraud the American taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, 3 weeks ago I asked ICE to explain this decision and put in writing the policy regarding the detention of illegal aliens found by local law enforcement. Why was this man let go? 3 weeks later, and I am still waiting. I demand an answer. My constituents deserve an answer, and millions of Americans deserve an answer. We're all still waiting. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker very much. I rise today to remind Americans that on Monday we will commemorate those men and women that have fallen in battle. This morning we are laying a wreath in the Arlington Cemetery in reflection and remembrance of women who have fallen on behalf of their country. We want to say to all those families, those mothers and fathers and extended family members, we offer our deepest gratitude and sympathy, and as well to the Blue Star and Gold Star mothers who remain active in serving this country. As a member of the Military Families Caucus, I'm delighted to be able to say that we stand for the families. And our promise is, even to those who still live and still fight,
that we fight for your resources, we fight for the opportunity that you will have when you return home, a good-paying job, and educational opportunities, and the ability to heal and mend and to provide for your families. We mourn those who are lost. We pay tribute to them. But we say that the nation will never stop being grateful for those who've lain in battle and who, in fact, have sacrificed their life for us, for freedom, democracy, and justice. We pay tribute on this Memorial Day. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that during further consideration of H.R. 1540 in the Committee of the Whole, pursuant to House Resolution 276, Amendment Number 55 and House Report 112-88 may be considered out of sequence.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks, include extraneous material on H.R. 1540.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 1540. Will the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Womack, kindly resume the chair? The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 1540, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2012 for military activities of the Department of Defense and for military construction, to prescribe military personnel strengths for fiscal year 2012 and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Wednesday, May 25, 2011, proceedings on Amendment Number 100, printed in House Report 112-88, offered by the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, had been disposed of. The Chair understands that the proponents of amendments numbered 101 through 109 will not individually offer their amendments. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 110, printed in House Report 112-68. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 110, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Inslee of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Inslee, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we're offering a simple amendment that will make it much easier for our wounded warriors to obtain access to adaptive recreational equipment. We have these proud men and women coming back from the field of battle with obviously very, very severe wounds, and what we have found is some of the best things they can do to get back with their lives and professional development is to have access to adaptive recreation, both services and equipment. And I know some of these folks, they do incredible things with paralysis, skiing, with severe injuries, riding adaptive bicycles. People have lost their vision, wounded warriors getting back up on the slopes. And it's been a tremendous thing for these men and women to help restore their confidence, rebuild their strength, and get back into the swing of things. Research has shown this works both from a psychological but physical standpoint. But we have a little glitch that whereas our veterans through the Veterans Administration can have access to this adaptive equipment, such as monoskis and adaptive bikes, these hand crank bikes, our wounded warriors haven't necessarily had the authorization to be provided that equipment who are on active duty. So my amendment would simply authorize the Department of Defense to make that available, and I have been inspired by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Dudek, who until today has been the commanding officer of the Warrior Transition Battalion at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Tacoma. He's moving on to continue this work here at the Pentagon. He lost some function in his limbs and has done a tremendous job helping wounded warriors get back going. We'd like to extend this system-wide now, and this would authorize the DoD to do that. So we would commend this as one step forward to helping our proud men and women regain their confidence and joy at life and professional abilities. We commend this, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to claim the time in opposition to the amendment, although I don't oppose the amendment.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I commend the gentleman on his amendment. I think it will make the bill stronger. We should be doing all we can to help our wounded warriors. This is something that fortunately he picked up on, and I think it's an exceptional idea. I thank him for it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Serves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields balance of his time. Gentleman
Yield
from
back
California.
the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 111, printed in House Report 112-88. For what purpose does a gentleman from Texas, gentlewoman from Texas, seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized. I'm sorry, the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 111, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this morning, in fact, just a few minutes ago, I spoke on the tribute that Americans will give to their fallen this coming Monday. Sadly so, but with joy and appreciation for the bravery of those who sacrificed their lives and their families. Today I rise in an amendment with my colleague and a member of the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Johnson, to ask support for an amendment that can bring all of us together. The designation of a National Day of Honor to celebrate the members of the armed services who will be returning from deployment in Iraq and Afghanistan and other combat areas. This National Day of Honor would recognize the enormous sacrifice and invaluable service that those phenomenal men and women have undertaken to protect our freedom and share the gift of democracy in other parts of the world. How many of us have stopped to say thank you to a soldier walking alone in an airport, maybe having made a travel of millions of miles, thousands upon thousands of miles, to find himself or herself in their rural hamlet or urban center coming home? They've come home over the years, and they have come home not seeking glory or appreciation. That's our men and women. The men and women of the United States military intelligence community who helped bring down Osama bin Laden didn't ask for applause and appreciation. But my amendment will give all Americans, no matter what your political views, religion, ethnicity, gender, or background, to be able to say thank you. It's reminiscent of times that some of us did not live through. I'm reminded of the pictures that I saw of those celebrating in the streets during World War II. My uncle served in World War II. My grandmother sent her sons to war. She watched them one by one, and proudly so. As an immigrant American, she was glad to be able to send them to fight our battles. Now, as we make our decisions to bring our troops home, to be able to provide opportunity of economic development and education, let's have a day where all of us will be able to be in the streets, if you will, to be able to say thank you. So I ask my colleagues to join me to say thank you to one of the most diverse exhibitions of American bravery and courage, and that is the United States military. As you can see, here they are, without fanfare, fighting for us in the midst of battle. And all I want to do is to say thank you. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to claim the time in opposition to the amendment, although I don't oppose the amendment. In fact, I thank the gentlelady for doing this. I think that she's exactly right on. There's nothing more than we can do.
For 5 minutes.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I think everything that we can do to honor these warriors who are out there fighting for our freedoms and freedoms of those around the world, we should do. And I thank you for this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Washington, from Texas. Texas has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I'm delighted to yield to the ranking member, and I thank the chairman very much for his kind words. I'm delighted to yield to the ranking member 1 minute.
Thank you. Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the gentlelady for bringing this very, very important amendment forward. I think the most important thing that we can do for those who serve in the military is show them our support in every conceivable way, and especially when they come home from service. Iraq and Afghanistan have been very, very difficult fights. The men and women in our military have fought bravely and amazingly. Every time I meet one of them, I am just in awe of how great our military is, how brave they are, and what a tremendous job they've done for us. But it is really important that we don't forget that here at home. And a statistic that I've heard over and over again is it's really only 1% of the population in the United States who's actually participating in this war. It's critically important that the rest of us remember it, support those who fought in every way possible. I can think of no better way to help make sure that happens than the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas to give them a day when we all think about it, we all remember what they've done. It's critical that we do that every single day. This will help in that process. I thank the gentlelady for offering the amendment, and I urge support.
Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to close if you're yielding back.
From California, continues to reserve.
Let me first of all thank the chairman of the full committee and the ranking member of the full committee. Although this is not an amendment that pertains only to my district, but I do want you to know that I represent a district that is home to one of the largest populations of military service members and their families in the nation. There are over 200,000 veterans of military service who live and work in Houston. More than 13,000 are veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan war. They should return home to banners and to communities that recognize their service after years of combat. And I might say that the state of Texas, along with all the states, claim to have their wonderful share of our men and women of the United States military. Mr. Chairman, I offer this amendment so the children of America can likewise be with us as they wave their flags and welcome our men and women home. As President John F. Kennedy said, as we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. Let us live and celebrate on this National Day of Honor the men and women who have served us so gallantly and bravely. I ask my colleagues to join me and Mr. Johnson in support of this amendment. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Again, I want to thank the gentlelady for her amendment. We have a good bill. This National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, is that the one we're working on? Is a very good bill. We have a lot of good things in it. But this amendment alone is reason to vote for the bill. I think we should all on Memorial Day, on the day that you're requesting, and throughout the year, honor those who are willing to lay their lives on the line every day for us, and I yield back the balance of my time.
It's back his time. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentlelady from Texas.
On that, I would like a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas will be postponed. The chair understands that the proponents of amendments numbered 112 through 133 will not individually offer their amendments. It is now in order to consider amendment number 134, printed in House Report 112-88. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 134, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Runyon of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Runyon, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman McKeon and Ranking Member Smith, for your leadership and working with me on this amendment. Again, it is an honor working with the both of you. The Commission on Wartime Contracting is an independent, bipartisan the Legislative Commission established to study wartime contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan. This 8-member commission was mandated by Congress to study federal agency contracting for reconstruction, logistical support of coalition forces, and performance of security functions in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. In their latest report, the CWC found that as contingency operations have stabilized, agencies have not shifted contracting approaches to introduce the much-needed competition into long-term support contracts. Competition is the key that we need to get our warfighters what they need through a fair and transparent contracting process and at the best value for the taxpayers' money. I know this is something that we can all agree on. My amendment would require the DoD to establish goals for competition and contracts awarded in support of a contingency operation, and would require an annual review of omnibus contingency contracts to identify any subcontracts that can be completed as a standalone contract. It would also amend Section 863 of the fiscal year 2008 NDAA to increase reporting requirements to competition and contingency contracting. I urge my colleagues to support this critical amendment in support of the men and women serving in Iraq and Afghanistan and in support of the American taxpayer, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Does any member seek time in opposition? Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you. I seek the time in opposition, though I'm not opposed to the gentleman's amendment.
Without objection, gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you.
For
Just
5
briefly,
minutes.
I thank Mr. Runyon for bringing this to our attention. I think he's explained it very well, and I think this body should support the amendment. And with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank the gentleman for his support, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The chair understands that the proponents of amendments numbered 135 through 140 will not individually offer. Now, in order to consider amendment number 141, printed in House Report 11288, for what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 141, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Thompson of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the chairman, ranking member of this committee. I rise in support of the Thompson-Berkeley Amendment number 29, which is nearly identical to H.R. 1832, the Bipartisan Service Members Telemedicine and E-Health Portability Act, or STEP Act. This amendment will bring essential reforms to how our service members and veterans access care, and common sense, no-cost changes to how the Department of Defense administers health care. Currently, the Department of Defense has limited ability to allow its health care professionals to provide care when the patient is in a different state. Department of Defense's hands are also tied when it comes to civilians or contractors who have stepped up to fill shortages in desperately needed positions, especially mental health. As a result, many in the military are required to travel long distances in order to access care. And this can add undue stress and financial burdens to everyday lives of our servicemen and women. Too often, these circumstances contribute to those who need help the most going without, and in some cases, falling through the cracks. By removing location requirements, this amendment will allow the Department of Defense qualified and credentialed healthcare professionals, including contractors and civilians, to get to their core mission of helping their compatriots in need. This will allow our National Guard, Reserve veterans, and retirees quicker and more efficient access to care and open the door to allow for the modernization of the Department of Defense healthcare delivery. This amendment will allow for new technologies in telephone and internet communications to expand into the Department of Defense, which will greatly expand access, especially in rural America. It will also allow more specialists to be involved in providing care. When it comes to behavioral health, the Guard and Reserves have been hit especially hard. This amendment will allow the Guard and Reserve to access behavioral health care right here at home, from their home immediately when they need it most. This has been a very important issue to me. I I've met with our military and veterans over the past several months and closely examined the behavioral health issues affecting our young men and women. Recently, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Peter Chiarelli, said, and I quote, "The Army, like the larger American society, is suffering from a shortage of behavioral health specialists, and that is, in fact, a national crisis. Efforts in telebehavioral health, allowing specialists to meet with patients through teleconferencing technology, for instance, could increase the effectiveness and reach of a limited number of providers." But the General then said, there are challenges regarding the credentialing and licensing of specialists to work across state lines. Mr. Speaker, this amendment will directly address this issue and has the means to dramatically improve and change how our nation's warriors access care. With these restrictions removed, it opens new doors to how the Department of Defense can administer and expand its health care programs. To be clear, there's nothing in this amendment intended to change nor be the basis for any future change to Department of Defense or state-based scope of practice, laws, or regulations. Ultimately, this amendment is about technology and modernization. It's about new ways for service members and veterans to access care. It's about fulfilling a pledge to take care of our veterans regardless of where they live at no cost to the taxpayers. No new cost to the taxpayers. This bipartisan amendment has broad support from the Pentagon and military community. Some of the most notable groups include the Air Force Association, American Legion, the Association of the United States Navy, the Enlisted Association National Guard, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Mental Health America, Military Officers Association of America, National Guard Association of the United States, Reserve Enlisted Association, and the Veterans of Foreign War. I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this common-sense, bipartisan, no-cost amendment. As Memorial Day approaches, we owe our veterans and service members as much. I thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserve. Any member seek time in opposition? Gentleman from Washington.
Yes, I will arise to claim the time in opposition, though I am not opposed.
Without objection. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for offering the amendment. We have no opposition. We support it. Appreciate him bringing it to our attention on the committee, and I urge the body to pass the amendment. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The chair understands that the proponents of amendments numbered 142 to 147 will not individually offer their amendments. It is now in order to consider amendment number 148, printed in House Report 112-88. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 148, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Turner of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is really very simple. You know, we've had a recent election where the tide of the taxpayers has spoken, where they want this House and they want Congress to start making decisions and the government to start making decisions to address this issue of our debt and the existential threat that we have to our country of out-of-control spending. We have an issue where the Enterprise Logistics Directorate is being moved by the Air Force without any analysis as to what's good for the taxpayers. It's an arbitrary decision that appears to be made somewhere in the bureaucracy and needs the accountability of the taxpayers. Congress has to have the effective oversight to ensure that the taxpayers' dollars are being spent effectively. And what's interesting about this is the Air Force first said, we're not going to move anybody. And they said, we're going to move everybody to Ohio. And they said, we're going to move everybody to Alabama. Then it said, we're not going to move everybody. Now they're back to moving everybody to Alabama. And when you ask them, they don't have one analysis, one scrap of paper that says what's best for the taxpayers. This is based on personalities and arbitrary actions. And this is an important directorate. This directorate mission is to empower the warfighter to leverage information as an effective weapon anywhere, anytime. It develops fields, sustains and operates worldwide communications, computer systems, and capabilities for the President, the Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Unified Combatant Commanders, Services, and Specified Department of Defense. It contracts for the procurement of information technology systems and services supporting DoD-wide customers. This should not be a parochial issue. This should not be a parochial fight. This should be an issue of what is best for the taxpayers. There has been no analysis done. My amendment does not step in place of the decision-making of the Air Force. In fact, what it says is let's do a cost-benefit analysis, and then the Air Force gets to decide, but it requires that that cost-benefit analysis be done before anybody moves. You know, again, remember, the Air Force has said, leave everybody in place, move them all to Ohio, move them all to Alabama, leave them in place, now move them to Alabama. This should not happen till we have a cost-benefit analysis where we could spend all this money, move all of these people, find out, in fact, that it costs more after the move. We could even be in a situation where we have to move everybody back. We're just saying, let's do a cost-benefit analysis. This is an amendment for the taxpayers. This amendment needs to pass. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Does any member wish to claim time in opposition? Sorry. For what purpose? Does the gentlelady from Alabama?
Thank you. I stand. Sorry. Okay, I rise in opposition.
Does the gentlelady claim time in opposition?
I rise in opposition to this amendment, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand before you today to urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment, very respectfully from the gentleman from Ohio. I'd like to thank Chairman McKeon and his staff for agreeing to allow me and others the opportunity to debate this specific amendment. The Air Force recently made a decision to combine two programs that fall under the Air Force Program Executive Office. EIS, currently located at Gunter Annex, Alabama, and ELS, located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, would be consolidated at Gunter. Basically, the job of EIS is to design, acquire, install, and maintain operations support systems for the Air Force and the Department of Defense. And the job of the ELS is to empower the warfighter to leverage information as an effective weapon. It makes good common sense for the management of these functions to be consolidated. Additionally, Air Force Materiel Command has approved this decision, and Congress should allow this decision to move forward. My understanding is that no jobs from Wright-Patterson would be transferred. Only the management of Air Force Logistics Systems would be removed from Wright-Patterson, where it has been for only 2 years. This management role of acquiring and sustaining enterprise-wide logistics systems would return to Gunter, where it had been located for more than 20 years. However, the Turner Amendment would require a cost-benefit analysis of the consolidation that would then need to be approved by the House Armed Services Committee, and this action would be costly and further bind the hands of our military commanders. It is very important to note that the 2005 BRAC Commission report showed that doing these operations at Gunter is more cost-effective than at Wright-Patterson. Therefore, there is no need for another costly, drawn-out study. It's important for us to allow our military commanders to make decisions that help the warfighter by increasing efficiencies when completing their mission. If we adopt this amendment, it will represent congressional interference in a decision that our commanders in the United States Air Force have already made. I encourage my colleagues to vote no. Thank you. I reserve my time for my colleague from Alabama.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you. Many times we talk about the taxpayers and saving the taxpayers money. But unfortunately, sometimes when it comes down to parochial interests, we get to the point where we say it doesn't really matter what's in the best interest of the taxpayers as long as it's coming my way or as long as it's my state. All this amendment says is, let's look at what's best for the taxpayers. That's all it requires is analysis of cost-benefit. In fact, this issue was looked at by the 2005 BRAC process. The Air Force looked at merging these functions at Wright-Pat and Gunter at Hanscom, and then Wright-Pat and Gunter. In both cases, in both the 2005 and the 1995 BRAC process, this was rejected. This is going outside of BRAC. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my colleague from Ohio, Mr. Austria.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank Mr. Turner for yielding and offering this very important amendment. You know, it's especially critical as we continue our work in the House of cutting unnecessary spending and bringing transparency and accountability for taxpayers' dollars that we have an amendment like this in place. And this amendment, again, simply asks the Department of Defense and the Air Force to provide that same transparency. The Air Force is merging, as we heard, two important areas of logistics with the Enterprise Logistics Systems, ELS, and the Enterprise Information Systems, EIS, into a new portfolio known as the Business Enterprise Systems Portfolio. Again, this amendment is simply saying as you make this merger, as you make this combining these two different portfolios, do a cost-benefit analysis. EIS, which includes activities such as ECSS and others, have been shown to be cost efficient and much needed to modernize the Air Force logistics and information technology systems and services. ELS currently manages a very large programs at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Gunner Annex. There are approximately 1,000 jobs, including military, civilians, and contractors, employees within the Enterprise Logistics Directorate. Asking the Department of Defense to provide a cost-benefit analysis of their decision to combine these portfolios makes sense. You know, to respond to the comment of this being a costly study, this study will provide Congress the same transparency and the accountability of taxpayers' dollars that we here in Congress are being asked. And I support the Air Force's plan to become more efficient, but we need to make sure that there's a good business case and these moves actually are efficient and they are in the best interest of the taxpayers. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentlelady from Alabama.
Yes, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to the gentleman from Alabama.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment. First, I want to thank Chairman Turner for his hard work and dedication when it comes to national defense and the well-being of our warfighters. I'm privileged to be able to serve on the House Armed Services with my friend. With that said, I disagree with my friend on this amendment. I believe this amendment calls for an unnecessary report to Congress meant to delay the Air Force's decision to consolidation and move the Program Executive Office for Enterprise Information Systems. This consolidation is at no cost to the Air Force. Adequate cost studies already exist as a part of the 2005 BRAC Commission report. Those reports show that executing these operations at Gunner Annex in Montgomery, Alabama, is more cost-effective than either Hanscom Air Force Base, Massachusetts, or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. The Air Force chain of command supports the decision to consolidate and relocate. In short, Mr. Chairman, I believe that this amendment is an example of one of the ways that we can save money and make efficient choices when it comes to the Defense Department that doesn't come at the expense of the warfighter. At a time when our nation is facing its dire fiscal situation, these are the types of small cost-saving decisions that add up over time. I would also like to thank my colleague from Alabama, Ms. Martha Roby, for her leadership on this issue. She's a strong advocate for our brave warfighters, and I would like to associate myself with her remarks. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back and urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Ohio.
How much time do I have remaining?
Gentleman from Ohio has 15 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 2005 BRAC Commission actually rejected this consolidation, and it was proposed at that time for Massachusetts. In 1995, it was proposed. Otherwise, we should not keep moving these jobs around until we have a cost-benefit analysis. All we're asking for is just a cost-benefit analysis to determine where they should be. This decision was just made last week. It needs to be reviewed.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlelady from Alabama.
Mr. Chairman, I just, in closing, would like to say, again, I urge my colleagues to vote no. The Air Force has made it clear that this is the consolidation that they want, that it is efficient for their operations at Gunner Annex. So, again, I urge my colleagues to vote no, and, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request a roll call vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio will be postponed.
Thank you.
The chair understands that the proponents of amendments numbered 149 through 151 will not individually offer their. It is now in order to consider amendment number 152, printed in House Report 112-88. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 152, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Kravac of Minnesota.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Kravac, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield myself 3 minutes. I rise in support of my amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
After years of excessive spending, the United States is facing difficult economic and fiscal straits, Mr. Chairman. Presently, our country is suffering under $14.39 trillion in national debt, and roughly 40 cents of every dollar that we spend must be borrowed and placed on the backs of our children. Make no mistake, funding for government programs and nonprofit organizations that are not critical to the functioning of core government services must be considered for cuts. With an extensive lobbying effort to portray the Institute for Peace as incredibly important to our nation's work on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, a few U.S. officials have signed letters in its support. While I have seen evidence to the contrary, I will, for the sake of argument and respect for the handful of generals that support the Institute for Peace, cede their point. However, I will note that the United States Institute for Peace grant program is entirely duplicative of existing grant programs in the United States government, the private sector, and nonprofit organizations. At a time when the government must do more with less, I remain convinced the research, training, workshop holding, and humanitarian work of the United States Institute for Peace small staff in Afghanistan and Iraq can be replicated by divisions or offices with the Department of Defense, the State Department, or through entities like the Peace Corps and USAID. It must. We are a nation teetering on the edge of insolvency. For Admiral Mike Mullen recently stated, as most significant threat to our national security is our debt. Now is the time to make the tough calls, Mr. Speaker, and the United States Institute for Peace is a program that our children and our grandchildren should not be funding at the sake of their futures. Mr. Chairman, therefore, in close, I'd like to urge my colleagues to support Amendment 152, and Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
To claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I do oppose the amendment. I will yield to my colleagues to explain our side, and I will begin by yielding 1 minute to the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Berman from California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I have to say it boggles my mind how we can argue 1 minute about whether to withdraw troops from Afghanistan or authorize the use of force in Libya, and in the next minute seek to eliminate the one U.S. government institution that is dedicated to resolving such conflicts peacefully. No other institution can accomplish the mission Congress gave the USIP. No other agency has this peace-building mandate. General Petraeus called USIP's work invaluable, a potential key to the success and the enormous challenge we face. Undersecretary of Defense Flournoy talking about one specific example in Iraq where I quote, the USIP helped tribal and local government leaders forge a groundbreaking agreement viewed by local leaders and military officials as a turning point toward peace and stability in one of Iraq's most violent regions. I fail to understand what national interest could possibly be served by reducing the number of tools at our disposal. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the esteemed colleague from Utah.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment. I do believe we should defund the United States Institute of Peace. And contrary to the comments from the gentleman from California, I believe every department, every agency in the United States of America stands for and fights for peace. We don't have to have some separate organization that is just built on peace. No, it is the Department of Defense. It is the State Department. In fact, it is every agency within the United States of America that fights for peace. That's what our country stands for. We don't need a separate organization. We have spent over $700 million on this think tank that, while their intentions are good, quite frankly, we can't afford and we don't need. It is primary mission of the State Department and the Department of Defense to achieve the peace. It's not something we dole off to some separate agency in a fancy building kitty-corner to the State Department. And if the State Department and the Department of Defense aren't fighting for peace, then maybe that's a discussion we should have. But it is not the sole and only agency that fights for peace. We all fight for peace. And I vote that I encourage my members to support this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Lewis.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague and my friend for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I oppose this amendment, and I urge every single one of my colleagues to vote no. Every single one of the last 5 presidents, including President Reagan and Bush, understand the importance of the United States Institute of Peace. USIP is not a think tank. They don't sit in the clouds shouting recommendations. They jump into the conflict and work side by side with DOD and with the Department of State in Afghanistan and Iraq. Listen to the generals and the commandos who are telling us that USIP saved the lives of our soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. USIP saved American taxpayer dollars around the world. This is not a partisan issue. It is not hawk versus dove. This is basic common sense. Prevent and stop conflict, promote dialogue, build bridges, and save lives. Ask all of my colleagues to vote no. It moves us away from peace, this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Give peace a chance.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, as a 24-year naval veteran, there is no one that wants peace more than me. But I also want to leave a future for my children. And we cannot do that by mounting debt upon them. And though the U.S. Institute for Peace may be a good program, unfortunately is a duplicative program that other programs can do that are already being paid for. So, Mr. Speaker, I say once again, this program needs to be eliminated so that we can maintain the savings, and I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot imagine anything more short-sighted than cutting off funding for the U.S. Institute of Peace. Since 2001, we've taken the militaristic approach to protecting America. And guess what? It has not worked. It's killed thousands of our people, it's cost hundreds of billions of dollars, and it has not made us any safer. For pennies on the dollar, we can have it what I call smart security, investing in programs like USIP that use time-tested conflict prevention and resolution techniques. From Kosovo to Sudan to Iraq and Afghanistan, USIP personnel have been laying the building blocks for peace and stability. Created by Ronald Reagan's presidential signature, it has been called a striking success story by General Petraeus. It does extraordinary work that has earned praise from leaders across the ideological spectrum. USIP saves lives. It's up to us to save USIP. Vote no on this misguided amendment.
His time has expired. Gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Speaker, thank you once again. I'd just like to remind the Speaker that the U.S. Institute for Peace has been in existence since 1985 and spent $720 million, and we have had many conflicts since then. So the United States Institute for Peace is not the critical factor in when we're talking about peace or war. And I'd like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't help but note my colleague from Minnesota's last comment. He seems to imply that because there have been wars since 1985, that somehow that is an indictment on the U.S. Institute of Peace. That's absurd and ridiculous. But it always seems that we can find more money for defense spending, but not for peace. It's a question of priorities. Last night I was here trying to argue that when the GAO and the subcommittee on sea power says that we don't need to spend $150 million on the LHA-7, friends on the other side of the aisle leap to their feet and declare, we've got to have this, we've got to have it. Well, the GAO doesn't think so. But yet, we're trying to zero out the U.S. Institute of Peace, which can keep us out of conflict and is on the ground in Baghdad, Kosovo, Haiti, all kinds of places trying to keep people safe and alive. And so, faulty logic, poor argumentation won't justify this bad amendment, and I urge a no vote.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Speaker, just a reminder that this is a duplicative program that other government agencies can do. Mr. Speaker, when I was in high school, I wrestled, and on the wrestling mat up on the ceiling, there was a sign. It said, if not you, who? If not now, when? Now's the time to start cutting programs that are duplicative and programs that go ahead and continue to spend our country's futures away. I reserve the balance of my time, sir.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Farr.
The gentleman has 3/4 of a minute remaining. The gentleman.
I'd only been yielding 1 minute at a time. I had 5. I yielded 4. How do I get down to 3/4?
Gentleman's opening statement.
I didn't make it.
Time.
I didn't.
Opening statement consumed time. 3/4 of a minute remaining.
I disagree with that, but I'll live with it. Mr. Farr, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman yield? Does the
I
gentleman
can't
yield?
believe what a stupid amendment this is because of the message it sends. The majority party whacked the hell out of the Peace Corps in your H.R. 1, and now you want to whack the heck out of the Institute of Peace. What message are you sending to the world? We can't put a price tag on peace, but we certainly can put a price tag on war. Try $6.7 billion. That's what we spend every month in Afghanistan. That amounts to $260 million a day. What a misguided amendment before us. To eliminate the Institute of Peace only spends the equivalent of 5 hours. 5 hours in Afghanistan. Come on. You're surrounded by peace givers in this room. Look at the lawgivers. They're not warriors. They're people that tried to make peace. You're not going to win the war in Afghanistan militarily. You're going to win it through peace.
Gentleman's time is